Please find a comfortable place to sit. Place your hands on your legs. Close your eyes or keep a soft focus on the screen. Take a deep breath in and out. A deep breath in and out. Continue to breathe deeply and slowly. Feel relaxation flowing down from your head into your neck, into your shoulders, down your arms, and into your hands and your fingers. Relax down into your chest, into your stomach, and down your legs, into your feet. Continue to breathe deeply and slowly. Okay. Good day. Welcome to the second lecture of my happiness class. Today's topic is perspectives on the nature of happiness, on what happiness is. Last lecture, I put forth the proposition that happiness is a feeling, or feelings, pure and simple. That feelings are the nature of happiness, or certain kinds of feelings are the nature of happiness. But many have disagreed down through the ages, and there has been real discomfort, and still with many people today, that with the idea that happiness is a feeling pure and simple. Now, when someone says, "I'm happy," they usually mean what they're feeling. So, happiness as a feeling, I think, is kind of a common understanding. But, as I said, many through the ages have strongly disagreed with this idea. The ancient Greeks, or at least some of the ancient Greek philosophers, saw happiness as a quality of a virtuous life. Happiness as a quality of a virtuous life. In other words, virtue was part of the quality of what you would call happiness. I ask my students, well, what is virtue? They usually don't answer right away. I think some of them know what virtue is, hopefully, but they haven't had time to think about it enough to give an answer. But happiness as virtue would mean the qualities of virtue. And virtue has to do with moral characteristics of character, moral qualities of our character. It includes things like honesty, responsibility, of trustworthiness, maybe humility, some would say courage. But these are desirable qualities of our character. And that's what the Greeks were talking about, that moral qualities. And down through the ages, virtue and happiness have been associated. And it's not just in the West, because philosophers in the East, for example, Confucius, really emphasized virtue as well. These moral qualities of character. And they were still talking about it at the time of the founding of America. America's founding fathers, for example, John Adams, they wrote about happiness, and they identified virtue as being central to happiness. And there are modern philosophers who still say the same thing, that virtue is the key here. For example, Julia Annas, who is a modern philosopher, agrees that worthwhile achievement is central to a meaningful concept of happiness. It should not be seen as a smiley-faced feeling. A smiley face feeling. Because that is not really worthy. Just a happy feeling. It should be worthwhile achievement. Now, what's worthwhile? Well, obviously, that is somewhat of a moral judgment. So she is pretty much in keeping with philosophers down through the ages who have stressed virtue as an aspect of happiness. Now, when it comes to virtuous behavior, that actually modern happiness science does associate such behavior with higher levels of happiness. But that doesn't mean that is what happiness is. A modern word that's being used, and it's being used consciously as a replacement for happiness, not as an attempt to define what happiness is. But you will hear the term well-being used very broadly. In fact, courses that I say that are happiness courses are called courses on well-being, because there is a certain preference for well-being over happiness that is seen as too ambiguous and difficult to define, that they want to bring in more objective indicators of happiness to make it more of a usable, practical term and objective things that we can see. I mean, the concept does include positive feelings. They say, yeah, well, it has to be positive feelings. If you're feeling negative, no matter what the objective conditions are, that can be called well-being. Yes, positive feelings, but also appropriate assessments of the objective conditions of one's life. Objective conditions, those are things that other people can see about your life. For example, physical health is something that can be seen and measured, and doctors can find out if you're physically healthy or not. And they want to include that in an understanding of well-being. They will also include things like mental health, which we can see sometimes by people's behavior. Also, comfort. being socially engaged. All those aspects have been identified as being conducive to happiness, but they're also bringing it in as an understanding of well-being. And having a sense of purpose, which is inward, is part of one of the indicators of well-being. Now, as I said, they're not trying to define happiness. They want to use well-being as a replacement for it because they think it's, in many ways, more practical. We can take a look at indicators and say, well, the well-being of our society is going down according to these indicators, and that's exactly what they do say. So, well-being as a concept is preferred by many to the word happiness because it does have these objective aspects to it. There's another word that I found that a number of people, when I read their books, they were arguing that we shouldn't say happiness, we should say flourishing. Flourishing is a more appropriate word. And the concept of flourishing includes accomplishments. It includes engagement and the quality of relationships as well as positive feelings. And quite often, when they're talking about accomplishments, they're saying, look, it doesn't have to benefit society, but doing something creative, something that builds something, whether you're working on a project or you're graduating from school, or that you are creating music or art, that those things belong to the idea of flourishing. Flourishing is very much bringing in what we do and accomplish. And therefore it has very much this normative idea, this virtue. Normative has to do with morality. There is a moral component here to judging this, and that's why they want to use the word flourishing rather than happiness, which they don't necessarily see as having a moral component. And let me read what David Sosa says. The sense of the expression flourishing is not that people feel good, but that they're accomplishing some things and taking appropriate pleasure in those accomplishments. Appropriate pleasure. If you're having pleasure but it's not appropriate, I guess that wouldn't count as part of flourishing. And the discomfort with not bringing in these normative aspects, these normative considerations, is actually pretty wide. That many have made the argument that if you're going to feel good, you should feel good for a good reason. An argument made by Alex Michalos: people should feel good because the objectively measurable conditions of their lives merit a positive assessment. Now, he's making this argument in the context of people's lives who are, say, we would consider bad conditions. Oppression, exploitation, poverty. That he's making the argument that if you're living in poverty under these types of conditions, that these conditions do not merit a positive assessment. We should not call them happy. You may feel happy, but no, we're not going to call it happiness because that's irrational. They're feeling happy when they actually shouldn't be. There's a judgment. And also, a pure moral argument here. This is Frank Furedi. People need to understand the moral meaning of good before they can feel good about themselves. So you have to understand what morality is before you can feel good. These arguments are pretty common. And I would say that there is real discomfort with the idea of people not earning a feeling of happiness. That's, first of all, feelings, there's discomfort with the idea of feelings anyway, because feelings seem fickle. They fleeting, and they're mostly seem beyond our control. And they can cause bad behavior and harm. So feelings are not necessarily seen as very good, and it's one of the reasons why we kind of stay away from feelings a lot in schools and certainly in academia. We want to concentrate on more objective types of things. But this another reason here is because of this idea that somehow feelings should not be detached from what causes them, and there should be good reason to feel them. Happiness, in this argument, should be earned. We don't want to believe that a couch potato is happy, has achieved happiness because they didn't earn it. If you're going to sit around and play video games all day, I don't want to hear that you're happy. And I certainly don't want to understand or see that someone who is bad, behaves bad, is happy. Or someone who's evil could be happy. So there is this moral component that we have discomfort with seeing happiness as just a feeling, because people we think who didn't earn that feeling may be feeling it. That is a certain viewpoint, as I said, that many people say that they have. And I've read this quite often, is that, these people claim to be happy, but I don't think that they should be happy. The other argument is the one that Michalos makes, and the idea here is that just feeling happy may be something that somebody in these poor conditions, exploitation, poverty, etc., feel. But if we say that they're already happy, that takes away the motive to change those conditions. It takes away the motive to engage in social causes, to deal with poverty and exploitation and prejudice and all the things that we think ought to change in society. And that is actually one of the worries of some people who are engaged in social causes, is that we don't want to talk about these people who are actually happy. And there are people living in poverty in third world countries that researchers have found are happier than the well-to-do Americans. And that is somewhat uncomfortable, because that means that your engagement to change conditions for people to make them happier is not necessarily seeing the reality that people can be happy, can feel happy, without appropriate assessments of their external conditions. Now, these are perspectives, many of them normative, bringing in different dimensions of time than the moment. And my critique of these perspectives is, first of all, if you're trying to discover the nature of something, let's say that you are having a scientific experiment to discover the nature of water or something else, you should not predetermine what that's going to be based upon what you want it to be. And obviously that would really screw up scientific results if we only went with results that were what we wanted them to be, making a moral judgment about that. So if we're going to talk about the nature of happiness, we should say, well, let's get down to what it really is as an experience, rather than whether that experience is earned, whether that experience is caused by something moral. Let's talk about what it is. My second argument here is that people do not experience long periods of time at once. The direct experience is only in the moment. What you're experiencing now is direct. What happened last moment is a memory. What will happen in the future is a projection. The only temporal dimension of direct experience is the present moment. And if you're going to talk about happiness as an experience, you're going to have to be able to identify that experience in a particular moment of time. Because if you can't find a moment in time where that experience happened, then you're talking about an abstraction, not an actual experience. We do not experience a lifetime at once, unless it's at the end of our life and our life flashes before us. We do not experience an hour at once. We experience the direct moment. So when you're saying we should include things like physical health, well, what is the experience of being healthy in a moment? It is feeling healthy. What is the experience of comfort in a moment? It is feeling comfort. So we come back to the experience is feeling. That is the value of our experience, and that is what will lead us to a better understanding of happiness, feelings. Happiness as a feeling, seeing happiness as a feeling, has great practical value, I believe. And I explained this in my last lecture, is that it puts the focus on learning how to feel better in the moment. Focus on what feelings do feel better, and what are going to be the consequences of trying to feel those feelings. It puts the focus on feelings. And we're going to stick with that theme, except we're going to still be talking about some perspectives that people have, for example, perspectives on how to pursue happiness. But let me also say that there is a bit of an argument among those who agree with me that happiness is a feeling. That they'll talk about positive feelings and as the essence of happiness and what we're all looking for. The disagreement is, some say it's the quantity of positive feelings or positive moments with positive feelings versus the quality of those moments. And the argument here is kind of based upon the idea that there is a big difference here between feelings, and it isn't just a matter of worthiness, it's a matter of how pleasurable or what the deep these feelings go when you talk about the quality. You know, this argument was one of the arguments that was made a long time ago. There was a philosophy called utilitarianism. It was started by Jeremy Bentham. And he came up with an idea that seemed like a no-brainer. He says, there's a pleasure-pain spectrum, and that people are moved from pain towards pleasure, and that basically describes our lives, always moving from pain to pleasure. And this was seen as important to understanding human motive, and he even talked about it. This is gives us a way to better govern. If we can find a way to allow people to have more pleasure than pain. So you might even call it a political philosophy in that way. But Bentham was highly criticized by a lot of people. He said, look, you just described the same thing for pigs. Pigs feel pain, you want to get away from it. They want to go towards pleasure. So you're saying that human beings aren't any better than pigs. It was someone, John Stuart Mill, also a very famous philosopher, who considered himself utilitarian. And he came to Bentham's rescue. He said, look, pleasures are not just pleasures of the body. You're not talking just about low pleasures that a pig could have. That the higher pleasures, the higher quality pleasures, are pleasures of the mind. And pigs can't have that. And so that was one of the arguments that was made for saying, give Bentham a break here. This is the second lecture. And the third lecture, I'm going to address perspectives on the pursuit of happiness. I focus there on the strategies that people have for pursuing happiness and the implications of those strategies for the assumptions they're making on what happiness is and how to get it. So that will be the next lecture, and I'd like for you to attend. Thank you. Namaste.